Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the Council Bluffs Public Library virtual presentation. My name is Marlis Leon, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian. Before we begin, I want to give a commercial moment. We have a couple of fun things coming up that I wanted to share with you in case you want to consider them also. Next Tuesday, October 27th at 6:30, our paranormal quest continues with Curtis Strutz sharing his studies on some of the nation's most haunted locations. Experience a fun mix of original photography, deep history, and storytelling, as Curtis is here with us in the library. And I just checked with him this afternoon because of the weather that we are predicted to be getting over this weekend and warned him to watch the forecast. But at this point in time, he says, yes, I'm going to be here. But you may also choose to Zoom from home if you wish. Then on Saturday, November 7th at 2 p.m., Larry Dwyer will be at the library here sharing with us from his book, Standing Bear's Quest for Freedom, to honor the National Native American Heritage Month. Again, you may choose to Zoom from home if you wish to participate also. Well, I have heard about and struggled to get included in one of Chad Lewis's road trips across much of the Midwest since 2008. With COVID hitting this year, it's been a benefit to me that I have no problem finding time in his virtual schedule to have him share with us today, mileage free. Chad's interest in the paranormal started simply because he grew up in Wisconsin. Yes, they have 3 communities in Wisconsin that each claim to be the UFO capital of the world. Wisconsin also claims to have many werewolves abounding in their forests, but of course. Chad brings us today from his home, his research, and his travels as a focus on our own state of Iowa's most haunted locations. Now, before we begin, be sure to know that you can add questions for our Q&A on the bottom of the Zoom screen for Chad in the chat box or in the Q&A. And if you are here in the room with me, state your question and then I'll repeat it to him just in case the mic doesn't pick it up. So, to now, let us join Chad Lewis in Iowa's most haunted locations.
Well, hello and welcome, everyone. While I get my computer working here for you, I first would like to thank everyone for showing up today that were brave enough to talk about Iowa's most haunted locations from the safety of wherever you're watching this program. I'd also like to thank the library for putting this on today as well, especially in the safety of daylight. My name's Chad Lewis. I'll be your presenter for this program. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, for the last 25 years, I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampires in Transylvania, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, really, really weird people, odd places, you name it. If it's just strange and a bit unusual, I've traveled around the globe in search of these oddities. But what I discovered on my travels is that sometimes the weirdest things happen right in your own backyard. So that's what we're going to explore today. Some of Iowa's scariest haunted stories. For the next 45 minutes or so, we will take a tour across the entire state. I'm going to provide you with the background, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts. I'll talk a bit about some of the research we do at these places. Heck, I'll even provide you with the directions to these places. But I'm going to leave it up to each and every one of you. Whether you're a diehard skeptic or a true believer or somewhere in between, to go to these places on your own and determine whether or not you believe they're haunted. But I should warn you, it's much easier watching these places on television than it is visiting. You're out in the middle of nowhere and you see that shadowy creature lurking from tree to tree. You simply can't turn to another channel and forget all about it. So, with that in mind, let's explore some of the scariest places of Iowa. And when I talk about scary places, people often think of cemeteries. The reason being is quite simple. Back when cemeteries were chosen, the land was thought to represent a portal between our world and the spirit world. So when your loved one passed on, it would just be easier for them to go from our world to whatever world you believe they go to. But regardless of whether or not you believe this theory, there are many places in Iowa where they think it's working in reverse, that the living are not moving to the dead, but the dead are coming to our world. First stop, Riverside Cemetery, Marshalltown, one of my favorite cemeteries in the entire state. Mainly people go here for this chair. It is called the cursed chair, the devil's chair, the witch's chair, the death chair. We don't know much about the chair. Records have been lost to history as to who bought it, why it's there, who it's a memorial for. None of that is known. But what we do know is that for many decades, people have talked about this as being a cursed chair. The dare goes that if you go out and sit on the chair, stand on it, or merely touch it, you'll be cursed with bad luck until the day you die. Mishap, misfortune, and death is said to occur if you take this dare. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking this is nothing more than superstition. In fact, I spoke in Marshalltown not that long ago. After the program, a woman came up to me and told me that as a young girl, she went out to the chair as part of her Girl Scouts local history project. Of course, none of the young girls dared to sit in the chair except one brave little girl. And now, decades later, they had recently had a reunion for all those Girl Scouts. All of the women showed up except one woman who was no longer alive. Anyone want to guess which one? Well, according to that witness, it was that same girl who sat in the chair. She did not make it from taking this dare. But again, you're probably thinking this is nothing more than superstition and folklore. But I've collected so many stories over the last 25 years about people having bad things happen to them that I've come to the firm conclusion that only a complete fool would, luckily or unluckily, the dozen or so times I've sat in the chair, nothing bad has happened to me, knock on wood, but you can decide for yourself. But if you do sit in the chair and you survive, don't leave the cemetery quite yet. You'll be missing out on another haunting, and that involves the old mausoleum. It was here they used to store bodies in the winter when you could not bury them when the ground was frozen. You'd have to store them and wait for spring to thaw the earth to bury them. These receiving vaults or holding vaults, as they were known. But this story is that this got turned into a mausoleum. And one year, many years ago, a man buried his wife in the mausoleum. The only problem was he buried her alive in the mausoleum. And now the story tells that when you go by, you will hear rapping or knocking coming from the inside of the crypt. People told me they've seen the door handle move and shake on its own. Others claim to hear things like, "Help me, get me out of here. I'm locked in here." Of course, nobody's in the mausoleum, at least not anyone who's alive. And it's a great story But is it anything more than urban legend? Was anyone ever buried alive? Well, yes, we know thousands of people were buried alive. We know this because we have thousands of newspaper accounts from the late 1800s, early 1900s. Now, back then, whether you were in a diabetic shock or in a coma, doctors would often pronounce you dead. But lo and behold, many people, some of which were even at their own funeral, would pop up just in the nick of time to be saved from being buried alive. This may seem a little silly today with modern science and medicine, but our great grandparents were so afraid of being buried alive, they came up with several inventions. My favorite is this. It's called a cemetery bell, and it does or did exactly what it looks like it would do. It was a bell that you could have above your grave with a rope on a pole going down into your casket. So if you awoke in time, all you'd have to do is tug that rope, it would ring the bell and alert the caretaker who lived at the cemetery that you had been buried alive and they could come and rescue you. But there was one problem with this invention, though. On many nights, the wind would set these bells off, giving the caretaker quite a scare, thinking everyone was buried alive. It was actually your responsibility to sit around your loved one's grave for several nights to make sure that they were truly dead and they wouldn't be crying out for help of you digging them up. For our next location, you may not want to ask locals how to get there because they'll tell you the wrong directions because they don't want you there. It's in Palo, a place called Pleasant Ridge Cemetery, also known as Lewis Bottom Cemetery. But most people call it 13-Step Cemetery. The legend is that if you go to this very rural cemetery during the day, there will be 12 steps leading you up into these graveyard. But if you're foolish enough to go there at night, a mysterious 13th step will appear and guide you into the cemetery. For decades, people have seen what appear to be strange balls of light similar to these floating throughout the cemetery. These balls of light change in size, shape, and color as they maneuver their way through the grounds. Others come out to this rural area and swear they hear the disembodied voices of people talking in the woods. But when they look around, no one can be found. But sometimes with hauntings, you get a little bonus as well. Not only do you have the haunted stories, but something extra. And you'll see what I mean because many people who come out to this cemetery looking for ghosts often tell me they've come face to face with what they are calling the hellhounds of 13-Step Cemetery. Now, if you're not familiar, hellhound legends tell of these large black dogs with glowing red or green eyes. They've been reported throughout history in nearly every culture on the planet. Many believe these creatures do the devil's bidding, that they are a harbinger of death, meaning that if you see one, much like seeing or hearing the Irish banshee, it means you or someone you know is going to die very shortly. And sure enough, people claim that they've seen these dogs, these devil dogs, roaming the graveyard. Unfortunately, most people don't stick around long enough to find out if they're actually real or not. But if looking for portals to hell is not your sense of adventure, you may want to head to Vinton to Evergreen Cemetery. Most people go here. It has a lot of Civil War veterans buried inside the grounds. And they have a statue marker that honors those who gave their life for their country. But that's not the scary part. The scary part comes in the fact that many unsuspecting visitors to the cemetery get very creeped out because they claim the statue will come to life and watch and move as you move through the cemetery, keeping an eye on you. To make matters worse, people often have seen what appears to be the ghostly image of a man dressed like he's from the early 1900s, always a flannel shirt and work pants, and he looks like he's just from a different era. He too vanishes right into thin air when people try to get a better or closer look at him. And it's not just people in the cemetery for pleasure that have these experiences. Many of the old caretakers of the cemetery have had experiences as well. One former caretaker told the Vinton newspaper that he was washing up the Civil War soldier, the statue, when all of a sudden it looked like he was staring at him, moving and talking. He had to quit spraying the face, saying, "I'm sorry." He thought the statue was actually real. But you don't have to travel all over Iowa to see a haunted statue. In fact, you don't have to go anywhere. Right in town, if you're looking to go to one haunted cemetery, I recommend you head here to Fairview Cemetery in Council Bluffs for a haunted experience. Actually, I recommend you don't go to this cemetery because many locals call it the Cemetery of Death, based on the Black Angel, a monument put up for Governor Dodge's wife, Ruth Ann Dodge. Legend was that for several nights she had a very spiritual dream, very realistic, in which an angel of great warmth and light came to her in the middle of the night in her dream and offered her a drink of this mysterious substance it was carrying in a pan of some sort. The first night she had the dream, she refused to partake in the liquid. But the second night, the dream appeared again. This time, once again, the angel was offering the liquid. She once again turned it down. And on the third night, having the same identical dream, she decided to have a sip of the liquid. She said it changed her spiritually, motivated her. She morphed and progressed into a belief system she had never felt before. Soon after, she was dead. Many believed it was drinking and consuming that liquid that caused her to end her stay here on earth. And ever since the statue was put up in her memory, it is not her grave marker. She is not buried there. People claim that it will come to life and move and fly through the cemetery. And there are so many variations of the dare here that you really can't do all of them. The dare is that if you go out to the statue and touch it, you will die. If you go out and kiss in front of it, you will die. Some say if you touch its wing, you will die. If you're a virgin, you will die. If you're not a virgin, you will die. Basically, if you're going out here, you will die from visiting this grave site. But yet, many people venture out there. You'd be surprised at how many people told me that they went out and held the hand at midnight or at the witching hour, hoping that some bad tragedy would befall them. But in Iowa, that's not the only angel that could cause your death or mishap, misfortune. Because if you go to Iowa City, you'll come to another black angel of death. This one was put up over the grave of a man who died. His wife found out that he was not faithful during their marriage, so she thought he might need an angel overlooking him in the afterlife to keep tabs on him. And it started out as a bronze statue. And just like the Council Bluffs one, it is said to move around and dance and fly through the area. And it also causes you to die if you visit. almost exactly every scenario I laid out at the Council Bluff Angel applies to the Black Angel in Iowa City as well. In fact, they say that the statue gets darker, a darker shade of black every year from all the souls that it harvests throughout the year. And many people go out there to do the dare at night. I've been there on numerous occasions, and every time I'm there, other people stop in at all times of the night just to see this angel. And these angels are all over Iowa. In Muscatine, you have a blue angel of death as well. So these are everywhere. You can't throw a rock in Iowa without hitting a cursed angel. But some cemeteries are a little bit different. In Algona, they wanted in the 1960s, your governor wanted to turn this cemetery into a tourist destination. The reason being is that it's one of the few known gypsy cemeteries to still remain in America. What happened was when the gypsy people traveled through Iowa, they were called the Roma. They would often die and they'd be buried where they died. And oftentimes they would not be allowed to be buried inside the cemetery proper. So they had to create their own cemeteries on the outskirts of the official cemetery. And that's exactly what they did here. They buried their dead in this small makeshift cemetery. As you can imagine, over the years, paranormal stories have sprung up around this cemetery. One legend tells that when you go there, no matter when it's day or night, summer or winter, rain or shine, you will immediately be greeted by giant black birds resembling ravens or crows that will stay there, almost as though they're monitoring you the entire time you're at this cemetery. Another dare tells that if you go over the barrier onto the graves of the Roma people, you'll be chased out of the cemetery by the vengeful spirits of those buried inside. Take a look at the iron gate on the graveyard. Many people believe that iron gates were put around graves to keep us out. But in actuality, they were put to keep the spirits in. During those days, the belief was that ghosts could not pass through iron. So if you were afraid of a spirit coming back from the dead to seek vengeance, you'd put an iron bar on their casket or an iron gate around their grave, thereby trapping them to the spot of their eternal rest. Believe it or not, this is the most common question I receive. Where can I go to spend the night in a haunted place? Well, if you have that macabre sense of adventure, you're in luck, because in Iowa, you have all kinds of haunted lodging options. Hotels, motels, B&Bs, campgrounds, resorts, and the like. One of my favorite places is in Davenport. It's the historic Black Hawk Hotel. Very upscale. You'll love the place. Very fine place to spend the night. In fact, many people go there to have their weddings. It's a very popular wedding reception place to enjoy the rest of your life together. It's also infamous for being the final spot for actor Cary Grant, who back in 1986 was staying at the hotel. He had a stroke and was carted off to the hospital. He did not die in the hotel. He died en route to the hospital. But it's not his spirit that's thought to be haunting the old hotel. It's several others, including what many people feel at first glance. They believe it's a woman getting married on her big night. She appears in a bridal gown walking through the area. When people get a little closer, try to make out who she might be, she simply vanishes into thin air. Others who catch a glimpse at this phantom bride report that she's nearly transparent, that they can see right through her. Often seen in the dining area where weddings are held. Others who spend the night there report all kinds of shadowy figures in the hallway. When the guests go out for the day and come back, they find their rooms been rearranged. Things have been moved as though some unseen force moved over them. Knocking and rapping happen on the doors. Sinks and faucets seem to turn on their own. Really weird things happen. But again, it's a very upscale place. You'll love staying there if that's your sense of adventure. Many people believe in the folklore of bridges as being this supernatural window, these portals, these gates, if you will, a beacon for all sorts of oddities. And it makes sense. Many people believe since bridges connect the water with land, they also represent connecting the spirit world with the living world. But regardless of whether you buy into any of this, there are numerous bridges in Iowa that have a haunted reputation. Right outside of Fort Dodge is one of my favorites. It's in a small town called, well, we'll get to that one. I'm a little ahead of myself. I forgot one of my favorite ones here, a little closer to you. Not far from Des Moines is the Metz Bridge. And this bridge you're seeing right here, the story is many years ago, a man was driving down the road. He had come from the bars. He was intoxicated and he swerved his car off the bridge and he drowned in the water below. Now, as you can see by the amount of graffiti on the sides of the bridge, many people go out to this location. And those who do report seeing the ghostly image of headlights or taillights coming toward them. They can see the lights coming toward them or from behind them. But when the lights get close enough to make out who or what it might be, they simply vanish into thin air, as though they're not there at all. But there's another story on the bridge, and that story involves a creature being out there, a creature that many believe is a Bigfoot-looking creature. They call it the Metz Mud Monster. 7 feet tall with that thick matted down fur, 300 to 400 pounds, glowing eyes, covered in mud from the bridge below. I talked to one gentleman who was there decades ago. He said him and his buddies were watching the water, waiting for the ghost of the vehicle when they saw this mud monster. He told me it was walking on top of the water, not in the water, on top of the water. That was enough for the witness and his buddies to hightail it out of there and vow that they would never return to the bridge. Again, judging by the amount of graffiti, you can see that a lot of people go there to see if that South Skunk River is haunted by the Metz Mud Monster. So I mentioned the Fort Dodge one just briefly a bit ago. Right outside of Fort Dodge is the town of Tara. It's all but forgotten, empty, ghost town, maybe literally, because this is Tara Bridge. Except the locals, they don't call it that. They call it Terror Bridge. The reason being is that the story goes back to the 1800s about the bridge being haunted. In fact, it is said that a pile driver, a railroad worker hitting spikes into the ground, had a spike come back up and decapitate him. Since that time, people refuse to go over the bridge, especially at night. Railroad workers, big, strong, sturdy men you wouldn't think would get spooked by anything, refused because they would see mysterious lights dancing over the bridge. They also refused to go home that way because they would often see what appeared to be a phantom train coming toward them. They could see the lights. They could hear the rumbling of the engine. They could feel the vibration on the tracks, but the train never arrived. I have newspaper accounts dating back to the 1800s talking about ghost hunters from Fort Dodge going out to this bridge for a ghostly encounter. But sometimes these stories morph and progress through the years. The train story's been nearly forgotten because a new story has replaced it. And that story tells of a distraught mother who went crazy. She snapped, went psychotic. She brought her children out to Terror Bridge and they waited. And they waited. Eventually, a train came rumbling by, and one by one, she tossed her children over to that oncoming train where they met their end. When all of her children were disposed of, she too jumped over and joined them in death. Now the legend tells that if you go out there, not only will you see the ghostly images of those young children roaming where they met their end, many claim the bridge is haunted by that murdering mother. The dare is that if you park your car on the bridge and you do not lock your doors and windows, the spirit of that mother will try to throw you over to your death below. The last time I was there, I was with noted researchers Noah Voss and Kevin Nelson. They were up above, as you can see, and I was down under the train bridge. Not only did they not stay in their doors and lock their doors and stay in the car, they came over to the edge, hoping that she would try to throw them over. I was down below filming, praying that she would throw them to their deaths. But unfortunately for us, she did not appear and they survived the encounter. But it is said that if you do the dare, you will be cursed. Many people have all kinds of odd things happen. For me, the last time I was there, we were leaving and I received a speeding ticket leaving the area. I wasn't that scared, I didn't think, but my first speeding ticket in 20 plus years. Was I cursed by the dare? Well, if I was, I consider myself getting off light with nothing more than a traffic violation. But the story gets even better on this road because dating back to that same 1800s time period, all the way up to modern day, unsuspecting motorists have been going down the road. At first, they were going down in their horse and buggy, and eventually their vehicles. That's when they noticed something staring at them from the side of the road in the brush. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that couldn't be there. But yet, it's staring right at them. So what are these witnesses seeing? Well, maybe I better let you just take a look. This creature, for a lack of a better term, they called it a werewolf. They said it was the shape of a bear, but the size of a bear, but shaped more like a wolf with a long muzzle and deep, dark, matted down fur. What's terrified most of the witnesses I've spoken with is that they claim that this thing is a biped, running upright on its hind legs like you and I do. I recently spoke with a woman who was out there with their friends when they saw this wolf-like creature on the side of the road. Like most people who see these things, even though they're in the presumed safety of their vehicle, they want to get out of there as fast as they can. So they gunned the car, said they reached speeds of 55 miles per hour on the dirt road. But when they looked over, the creature was easily keeping up with them, as though it wasn't even trying. It went for about a mile before they finally lost sight of this monster. But don't feel bad. Again, you're not the only people to believe in werewolves. Thanks to my good friend and colleague, Linda Godfrey, my home state of Wisconsin is now known as the werewolf capital of the world. It began when Linda was working as a journalist in southeastern Wisconsin. She started receiving reports of people traveling down a small stretch of road called Bray Road. There, usually at night, but not always, people would see a similar looking creature as the Terror Bridge. Again, a werewolf, that long snout, big fangs, hairy, bushy all over. Sometimes it would be eating roadkill or freshly killed prey. But the good news is that outside of charging at a couple of vehicles, these creatures seem to be just as afraid of witnesses as witnesses are of them. And rather than attack, they simply prefer to scurry back into the underbrush and remain undetected. So the good news is, if you go out to Terror Bridge looking for these creatures, most likely you won't die. Well, 50-50. Do so at your own risk. But if you think werewolves are weird, which granted they are, this next case is going to be beyond bizarre because it involves a bridge in Shell Rock, Iowa. The bridge itself doesn't seem to have a lot of paranormal activity. Not a lot of sightings happen on top of the bridge. It's like the old story of trolls living under the bridge, that's where all the activity happens. But instead of being trolls, many believe that the bridge is inhabited by Satan himself. It is called Satan's Bridge in Shell Rock. People claim that when you go out to the bridge at night, once you start walking under the underpass, odd things will begin to happen. You'll start to hear your name being called, but nobody's there. You may be tapped on the shoulder, but when you spin around, nobody can be found. Shadowy figures lurk in the trees. And of course, a demon or Satan itself is said to reside there as well. Most of the sightings are at night, but not always. You always get those people who want to visit during the day who get a little more than they bargained for. And not all places that are haunted seem like they would be haunted. Right down the road from you, you have the wonderful Union Pacific Railroad Museum, the old historic library. And it's here that staff members told me all kinds of oddities seem to take place. Books would fly off the shelf on their own or be moved around as though thrown by some unseen force. Others would see the ghostly image of a woman dressed like she was from the late 1800s, early 1900s. Staff members would see her and she would vanish into thin air. Tour goers would see her, and at first glance, they thought maybe she was someone who was dressed up in a period costume, a tour guide, giving tours of the building. That is, until she walked into a wall and disappeared or vanished right before their eyes. Other staff told me that often they would see the old exploring tent, this old expedition tent, that the sides of the tent would start flapping as though moved by some unseen force. They went over to check it out to make sure it wasn't a draft, a window open, something causing the flaps of the tent to move. But when they got there, it would stop, start up again, stop. They couldn't figure out what it was. Perhaps it's the spirit of somebody connected with a lot of the antiques and artifacts they have at the museum. A lot of railroads have haunted stories to them, as you just heard at the Terra Bridge. Speaking of railroad stories, Charles City has one that's almost too weird to believe. And the story tells that many years ago, nobody knows exactly when, a couple carloads of train cars carrying orphan children crashed in Charles City and went up in flames, consuming every single person on board. Now the dare is, if you go to a place called Orphan Hill in Charles City, where the train was said to have crashed, you will see the ghostly images of those children. Others claim that you will hear the cries of the children out there when you're there. The screams seem so painful as they're being burned and charred alive in the train car. It's a great, wonderful, secluded, creepy spot to visit. But the story might be a little too creepy because we have no verification that this story ever occurred. We've been unable to find any newspaper accounts of the crash, any reports in local historical society journals, or any of the town records. You would think that if several dozen orphans crashed and burned alive, that might make the newspapers of the time. But as far as we know, the story did not happen, which then begs the question. For some people, seeing equals believing, but for others, could believing equal seeing? This time of year, people often ask me if I have a recommendation of a haunted book, a scary book that they can read to get them into the Halloween spirit. So, being that we're doing this for the library, it's only fitting that I give you a recommendation of the scariest book you will ever read. Because if you think you're brave enough, if you think you have what it takes, I dare each and every one of you to try to make it through the sappy love story, Bridges of Madison County. This book is so scary, they made a horror movie about it. But when you're done reading and watching the book, skip it and go to the Bridges of Madison County, Winterset, more specifically, the old Roseman Bridge. As you can see here, it was built in the late 1800s. Almost immediately, it got a haunted reputation. One variation of the story tells that an escaped convict made his way to the bridge. The townsfolk surrounded him in the middle of the bridge. They were going to apprehend him when they heard a loud boom, like a cannon being fired, and the man simply wasn't there. They couldn't find him. They had both exits covered, but he disappeared. In a more sinister version of the tale, they tell that the townsfolk caught him, strung him a rope over the rafters, and took his life at the end of that rope. Since the bridge was built, farmers had trouble going across the bridge at night. It was though their horses refused, as though they were picking up on some weird spirit not being seen. But the farmers saw it. They saw balls of light on the bridge, often at night, forcing them not to go over the bridge. Unfortunately, today you can no longer take your horse and buggy over the bridge, but you can walk out there. Those who do often report hearing that phantom boom of the cannon going off. Others report seeing and hearing the ghostly image of a man struggling, hanging from the rafters. Some have seen the noose and it vanishes right before their eyes. My advice, if you're going out there, do so just before dark. That's when the hundreds of bats that live in the bridge will come out and greet you and make sure you have a wonderful evening at the Roseman Bridge. How many of you recognize this location? Sorry, bad joke, cornfield in Iowa, but you will recognize this when I tell you this is the exact spot where music died. It was 1959 when Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, were all playing the Winter Dance Party. They had just finished their show in Clear Lake, downtown at the historic Surf Ballroom. Buddy Holly was upset because their tour bus kept breaking down and freezing up on him. So he had a plane hired to take him and two other artists to the Fargo, North Dakota area for their next show. The following morning, when the plane never arrived, they sent out a search party. They didn't have to go far. Just north of Clear Lake, they found the crashed remains of the airplane. All three of the artists and the young, inexperienced pilot were dead on impact. Some years later, they put a makeshift memorial for the artists at the crash site. If you follow this trail about a quarter of a mile, you'll get out to the memorial site. Many people come here and take comfort and solace in the fact that the music of these men will live on forever. Others believe it's more than the music that carries on. They believe the place is haunted. They'll go out there and hear the phantom sounds of music being played. But when they look around, it's nothing but crops. Others claim they swear that a plane can be seen crashing into the ground. But again, no plane is there at all. But my favorite stories come from unsuspecting motorists driving down the gravel road here when all of a sudden they see something on the side of the road. Thinking maybe it's someone who broke down or needs some assistance, they slow down only to report coming face to face with the ghost of Buddy Holly himself, complete with his trademark eyeglasses. Well, if it is the ghost of Buddy Holly, he seems to be busier in death than he was in life, because there are many places in the US that all claim to be the home of Buddy Holly's spirit, including the Surf Ballroom in downtown Clear Lake. If you've never been to the Surf Ballroom, it's a great place to go. Even if you don't believe in ghosts, you can go there and see a lot of Americana on display. But keep in mind that not all monsters in Iowa look like this. In fact, some monsters in Iowa are even scarier than this, because some monsters, well, those monsters look a little bit more like us, human monsters. That's exactly what's happened in Villisca, the old J.B. Moore home, better known as the Villisca Axe Murder House. Here you have the tragic events of 1912, when J.B. Moore and his 4 children, along with 2 family friends pictured at the bottom of the screen, they were staying over, and the family was out and about for the day. While they were gone, researchers of that era believe that someone or several people snuck into the house and waited up in a closet or up in the attic for the family to come home. And when the family came home, one by one, that person or persons went room by room, killing every single person in the house. The next morning, when the usually rambunctious family was nowhere to be found, neighbors thought it was suspicious. They went inside and found all the grisly remains. They notified the police. The police came and took control. Well, not really. People were still tracking bloody footprints through the house. The murder weapon, the axe, it was stolen as a grisly souvenir. Townsfolk did not wait for the investigation to be concluded. At first, they had no idea how many bodies they were dealing with. They were in such terrible shape, they didn't know if it was 5 or 25. The case was never officially solved. The good news now, or again, the bad news for you, if you want, you can rent the place out for the evening. Those who do believe it's haunted. They'll be staying in the place when all of a sudden they'll hear the cries of children thought to be those who met their end at the Axe Murder House. Toys, period toys of the time, seem to move on their own as though being played with by the spirits of the young kids. Others swear they've seen the ghostly image of a man walking through the house with an axe. If you'd rather not spend the night there, you can take a daytime tour of the estate as well. I get just as many reports from people experiencing things in the daytime as at nighttime. Usually in the day, it's children that see what appear to be period costume tour guides walking down the steps to the main floor. They often point to their parents and say, "Who's that person?" But when the parents look, no one can be found. But again, if this is the way you like to travel, you may want to book a night at the Villisca Axe Murder House. You can also go down to the local cemetery and pay your respects to the Moore family, who are all buried together at the cemetery. But as I'm running low on time today, I'm going to end on a different type of case, a case that many of you will be interested in, because this is the type of case that I received the most reports of. The overwhelming majority of people who contact me about a haunting, it's not about a serial killer, an untimely death, a murder, a mob hit, an accident. It's about their house being haunted. Some believe it's a relative haunting their place. They smell grandma's perfume on the anniversary of her death or grandpa's cigar. Others have no idea who or what may be haunting their house. Believe it or not, some are not bothered by it. They don't care. They've learned to live with it. It doesn't concern them. Whereas others will do anything they can to get rid of the spirits. But if you take any story away with you today, this is the one I hope you take with you. Because later tonight, when all of you put your head down on your pillows and you hear the wind rustling outside your window, I want you to ask yourself, is it possible, just maybe, that wasn't the wind howling outside your window? And maybe you too are living in a haunted house. And with that, if you want more information, my website, chadlewisresearch.com, has more than you could ever want or need. But I hope your adventure doesn't end here with the program. Grab one of my books, go on your own adventure of Iowa. And when you do, I think you'll discover that you live in one heck of a weird state. And I mean that in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen. You'll meet some odd people. And along the way, you might just discover that the scariest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions, comments, or stories. You can put them in the chat box if you like, or ask in person. But again, I want to thank the library for putting this together. It's rare you can come to a program like this at no cost, check out a wealth of information. So if you like programs like this, let them know so you get more of these. If you didn't like this program, let them know so you get fewer of these. But either way, they put a ton of work into getting me here. And they should be applauded, because I cannot think of a time in America's history where the library has played such an important role as it does today. With everything going on with the pandemic, politics, societal issues, libraries are the fabric that keep our communities together. They're a real treasure for any city that has one. So with that, I'll open it up. And if you have any creepy stories you'd like to tell or questions, I'd be glad to give my best answer.
Okay, so Chad, let's see you. And by the way, folks, we do have 2 copies of Haunted Iowa on our shelves. I just checked. Okay, so in the room, are there any questions or any stories you want to share? Yes.
I lived in a house that was haunted, and the lady bought the house. I did not want to there.
Oh, so the ghost was the lady of the house.
She bought the house, and she, I had invited the bishop in to bless the house, and apparently she was trying to keep him from going upstairs to where the bedrooms were. And so at night, I would sit up reading, my husband would be sleeping, and she would come up to the bed, and you could feel her going like this between my husband and I. And so I would try to tell her to go away, and she wasn't listening to me, so I'd tell my husband, get my husband up, and he'd tell her, and then she'd leave.
Oh, she didn't like him. Okay.
So then I heard lumber falling in that house. I had glass breaking against the wall of the house. All sounded very real.
But you never found any shards or anything. Okay.
No.
Okay.
And so I knew the story about the woman of the house from the bishop, but the glass breaking, I wasn't quite sure on. And we had an Indian that lived in the neighborhood for 20 years.
An Indian? Native American. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so I asked him what had been on the property before that.
Okay.
And he said we had a bunch of alcoholics. So I'm kind of thinking that might be where the glass breaking was from.
Mhm.
I was told that I would have to bless this house every 6 months to keep her spirit away.
Oh, really?
Do you have any comments or?
Did you hear that whole story, Chad?
I did. And let me start my camera up here so you can see that I'm actually real. Yes, and that's very common for people that have these experiences, that some people experience it more than others. I have couples that contact me saying, I experienced everything when my spouse never experienced anything. And you bring up a great point about the history of the place. People often contact me and say, we built a brand new house, but we have problems. And some people contact me with antiques they buy and they have problems with that. So it could be the person, could be the place, it could be the land. I don't know, but yeah, very weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Thank you.
Other stories or questions, either here or in our virtual community?
I'll check the chat here.
I am.
And just
I'm watching it. I've not seen anything yet.
keep in mind that this is just the tip of the iceberg. You can't throw a rock in Iowa without hitting a haunted location of stories and monsters. Not too far from you in the town of Van Meter, Iowa, back in 1903, they believed they were terrorized by a giant 8-foot bat-like creature. For 5 nights, the townsfolk shot at it with everything they had. And whether they were the worst shots in Iowa or this thing was impervious to their weapons. And the best part is now every year in the last weekend of September, they put together a Van Meter Visitor Festival where they go through and give tours of the places where they shot at this monster and give you a chance to come and look for it. So a lot of these stories continue hundreds of years later.
Okay. What started your interest in this? One of our virtual people asked.
Well, as you had mentioned earlier, I grew up near one of the 3 UFO capitals of the world Wisconsin claims to have. So that's what got me started. When I was in high school, I interviewed people about seeing UFOs. And I happened to start studying psychology at college the next fall. And it just went from there through graduate school. I ended up doing my master's thesis in psychology on students' belief in the unusual. And it just kind of spread from there into ghosts, monsters, UFOs, crop circles. And I've been doing it the last 25 years, and I'm left with more questions than answers.
Okay. So somebody else says, have you ever, oops, I gotta scroll up here. Come on. Have you ever actually witnessed with your own eyes an apparition or felt a cold spot with a ghost present?
All the places you hear me talk about or that I write about, I actually visited and investigated for myself. And I can count on maybe one hand, maybe one finger, the amount of times where I would say that was 100% paranormal. Now, many times I bring psychics with me, people who claim they can pick up on these spirits, and sometimes they complain of being pushed or pinched. Sometimes we've caught weird mist or fog on our camera that wasn't there to the naked eye, or weird voices on our audio recorders that we couldn't hear. But for me, it's all just real subtle. It's never anything where people are speaking in tongues or things are flying around the room. But people often ask, do you ever get scared at these places? Which I always say, if you're not getting scared, you're not trying hard enough. These are downright creepy places. Even if you don't believe in werewolves, if you're walking down Terra Road by yourself at midnight, it's hard not for your mind to conjure up images of a werewolf at every branch breaking in the woods. And that's part of the fun for me, is getting a bit spooked. I think that's why people enjoy it. It's the same reason we love scary movies or amusement parks, that being scared in a safe, quote unquote, manner, because I really don't think a werewolf's going to kill me, but it's still kind of creepy.
Okay. Another question?
I have had people that have lived in homes where their kids, they say, were possessed by a spirit within the home. Can you explain that? Or is
Did you hear that one?
I think I heard about kids experiencing things.
Children being possessed by a spirit in the home.
I don't get a lot of spirit possession, mainly because it's not my expertise area. But most of the time when it comes to kids, I get families that contact me saying their kid would often talk about playing with a imaginary friend. And there was a case in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where a woman said that her daughter kept talking to these old women in the house and gave them old weird Polish names. So the mother wrote them down and did some research on the house, and sure enough, they were former owners of the place. So a lot of people think kids may have, if there is such a thing as a sixth sense, maybe they have it more so than us adults. But again, it's all speculation. But in terms of possession, I haven't had a lot of people contact me about that. I did have one gentleman contact me claiming that demonic spirits or demonic demons were chewing and attacking his legs at night, but not in a physical manner, more of a spiritual manner. And he was very religious, and he ended up going back to his religious services. And for him, that helped. I spent a couple nights watching him sleep, very uneventful, as nothing seemed to be attacking him in the physical realm, but he felt something was attacking spiritually.
Okay. From our virtual audience, another question. Have you ever been to Pennsylvania? She is originally from Pennsylvania and wondered if you've got any stories from there.
I've only been to Pennsylvania twice, and it was more passing through for other legends, but I can tell you there's not one state that doesn't have its own legends, and they might vary a little bit. You know, in Wisconsin, we have a lot of Native American legends. In Minnesota, they have a lot of gangster prohibition ghost legends. You go out west, and they have a lot of the Wild West, Calamity Jane and Wild Bill Hickok, and those kind of ghosts. So every place has a little different, but you can't, you'll be able to find tons of books written on Pennsylvania ghosts, cryptids, and just plain straight oddities.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I had a good friend relate about their house. It's an older house, and they sensed something was going on, or a ghost, and they hired paranormal people or whatever to come in, and they sensed him right away. And they said the guy really liked their family, and he would sit in the rocking chair. He was a former owner there.
Ah, okay.
And he thought, and they were restoring the house, polishing all the pewter fixtures and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, and he thought it was really neat what they were doing.
He liked how they were
Yeah,
fixing
it
his
was a
place back
positive
up.
thing, and but then they after that they didn't really have any sense of it anymore.
Oh, when they got the house all nice again, he was done.
I guess
Okay,
they,
all right.
but it was. Well, I knew him in '65, and they probably
Mhm,
bought this in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure when he passed, but the wife always had it, and
Yeah.
as a boarding house,
Yeah,
and she sold it then.
Yeah.
But so it's a long-term thing.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you
Okay.
bring up a good point. Renovations seem to trigger a lot of these paranormal sightings or activity for some reason, whether it's the energy of things going about, or like you mentioned, the spirit, if there's one of a previous owner, they either like it or they do not like it. And oftentimes people will pick up on that.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for sharing. Anything, anyone? Yes?
I have- When my husband died, I moved like a month after he died, no, 4 months after he died. And I could feel a spirit around me for a while. And then
His
he
own,
stopped.
your husband's spirit, okay?
And when I moved 4 months later, the bishop told me that my husband's spirit was still in the house that I lived in. And that I moved too quickly on him. And so wasn't able to keep up with me. And I guess that's kind of a strange phenomenon to wrap your head around. Any ideas about that?
Very interesting. Normally, people report that if they experience ghosts or spirits, that it's something that usually happens to them no matter where they are. That they'll say, I thought it was my house, but we moved 4 times and I still have these things happen. Again, I don't know if a spirit, if it does, when someone dies, if they do become a spirit, you know, are they trapped to the spot where they lost their life? Are they trapped at the spot they love the most on the planet? I mean, if you do become a ghost, why would you hang out at a cemetery? Why wouldn't you go to places that you love, which is maybe why we have so many haunted bars here in Wisconsin.
Well, my thought was maybe he was spending time with one of his 4 kids. And I moved during that time, you know. I had no kids. We did not live in the house very long.
Okay,
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you for sharing.
okay. Any other things to share or questions? Yes, sir.
I've got one rather strange thing that happened to me many years ago. Shortly after I graduated from high school, I was living with a woman and her 4-year-old daughter in town just where we live in Logan, Iowa. And I was reading a book to Diane, the 4-year-old, just in the living room, very nicely. And Cheryl had mentioned to me that we heard phones at night sometimes or during the day, like something might have moved. And she had investigated earlier, and a woman that had lived there many years ago, her casket was in the room,
Mm, mhm.
as they did back then.
Yeah, yeah,
You didn't have funeral homes and stuff.
no.
But anyway, we kind of attributed to that, maybe, or whatever, you don't really care. But I was reading to Diane quietly, and for some reason, the front door, the storm door opened, the inside door opened, which I swear was locked. There was a breeze came through the house, and the back door opened and closed. I have absolutely no explanation for that whatsoever. We just kind of attributed them.
And that was it.
That was it. Diane's eyes were just so big. We just looked at each other. What just happened? That's honest to God true.
Did you hear that all, Chad?
I did. And keep in mind that a lot of these things that people at their house that happen, it is a one-time event or a one-off. It's maybe not something that happens every single week. And sometimes it goes decades without happening. So there really seems to be no rhyme or reason to it.
Well, I know the guy that lives there now is a good friend of mine. And he and his wife did hear something over the years as well. But they lived there, they then remodeled and took the doorways and everything out and changed everything. Now they hear nothing. No sign of anything.
Okay. Were they old doors?
Well, it was an older house.
It was an older house. Yeah.
But the doors worked very well.
We frequently in the library get somebody that's coming in to ask for tracing the history of who has lived in the house and wondering if there's been reports of it being haunted. We have not kept records of which houses people were asking for as to whether they are haunted or not. So I don't know if there's been any pattern of that over the years, but I do know that many people have experienced strange things here in Council Bluffs.
Mhm.
The storm door opens out. The
Yes.
door opens in.
Yes, there's no wind going like this one way or the other. This is a controlled issue happening. Got it.
I was 17 at the time, going on 18 or something.
Yeah.
I'm 71 and nothing like that's ever happened again.
Just one time, but one time was enough.
Yes.
It stuck with you. You remembered it
I
then.
remember it very clearly.
Yes.
Scared the heck out of me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yes, sir.
Okay, being how you have expertise in psychology, have you ever witnessed or experienced or heard of, you know how animal, domesticated pet animals, particularly cats and dogs, I've always grown up believing they have a sixth sense. To me, I kind of compare them to an owl or maybe a hawk or a falcon, where their hearing, their eyesight, and their sense of smell is 1 or 2 degrees or notches better than human beings. And I grew up with and around a lot of cats, indoor and outdoor both, and a fair amount of dogs too. But I've experienced on numerous occasions throughout my life, say in 1 or 2 particular houses, not all of them, where you could be sitting there late at night, past bedtime, all wrapped up in the news or a movie or something, and 1 or 2 of your cats, not too far from you, or a dog will awaken themselves out of a dead sleep, and they'll lean forward or stand up, kind of like they're frozen, and they'll look down a dark hallway, and they'll just stare, and pretty soon you'll hear a growl under their breath, and the growl will intensify or keep on, and a lot of times the cats will then unfreeze themselves and walk towards that dark hallway.
Oh,
Pitch
now
black.
that's creepy.
Pitch black with no night lights or nothing.
Okay.
And it's creepy, and finally you get to the point where, you know, a few times we'd actually get up and the hair on the back of our neck would be sticking out, or we'd have goosebumps, and you walk over and you try to find a light switch to turn on, and then next thing you know, you're looking down that hallway and you see nothing or you hear nothing. But obviously, to be awoken out of a dead sleep, those animals, particularly cats, have a sixth sense of some sort, whether it's smell or hearing. I'm assuming it's not their eyesight, of course, because whatever it was awoken them out of a dead sleep, unless they can sense or feel a presence or a spirit. Have you ever encountered or heard of anything like that?
Did you hear all that?
Oh, yeah. You would not believe how many people contact me saying that before they notice something weird in their house, their animals seem to pick up on it. Like you said, they were staring at something, and then it caught the attention of the owner, and they started looking and saw a shadowy figure move by. And you're right that if there is some other sense that can pick these up, we already know animals have a lot better senses than we do with the known senses. So maybe they have a better sense with the unknown as well. But lots of people contact me saying, if it wasn't for my dog or cat, I never would have noticed it.
Wow, that's neat.
Okay.
We have a cat that's that way.
Really?
He'll wake up. He's just looking, you know.
If someday, if I was doing like what you're doing, I'd be really tempted to find me a dog or a therapy dog or a cat to take along with me and travel like you do. Just video and watch their reaction, videotape their things.
Do you have a pet, Chad?
I do not. No.
Ah, well, there's something as a suggestion.
Yes.
Man's best friend.
Yes?
Have you ever been to the squirrel cage here in Council Bluffs?
Squirrel cage jail?
Yes. Years ago, I was first there, and that's another one. I don't know. Are they doing tours of it still?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I know.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know, certainly a popular place. And that's one thing that has surprised me over the last couple decades, that a lot of these old places that are no longer their original intent, whether they're old sanitariums, hospitals, psych wards, whatever, if they have a haunted legend, people now want to tour them. And I think it's great because not only are you getting some paranormal adventure, you're getting some history involved as well. And the paranormal is a great way to get younger people involved in learning about their history.
True, true. Anything else on the virtual attendance today, or from here in the room? If not, back to me. So thank you, Chad, for your presentation this afternoon, and to all of you for attending. Enjoy a haunted and happy Halloween. Have a good day.